The engine of my Silverado ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the humid afternoon air. For hours of asphalt, bad coffee, and anticipation, all leading to a deadbolt I didn't recognize. I stood on the porch of the lake house, the wood warm beneath my boots. In my left hand, I held a cooler packed with 2 ribeyes and a 6-pack of local lager. In my right hand, I held a brass key that had opened this door for 15 years. But the brass key was useless now. The lock wasn't brass anymore. It was a sleek, matte black digital keypad that looked like it belonged on a spaceship, not a timber frame cabin in the Adirondacks. It hummed with a soft, blue LED ring, mocking me. I didn't blink. I didn't yell. I just stared at it. This house wasn't just a weekend getaway. It was the finish line. It was 30 years of skipped vacations, overtime shifts at the plant, and driving a sedan until the floorboards rusted through, so I could make the mortgage payments. Every beam in this place had a story. Every scratch on the hardwood was a memory. It was my sanctuary, and now I was locked out. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single vibration. I set the cooler down. I wiped the condensation from my palm on my jeans and pulled out the phone. A text from Chloe. "Hey Dad, saw your truck on the Ring camera. Surprise. The girls and I are doing a solstice retreat content house this week. It's a huge opportunity for my brand. Can you stay at the Motel 6 off the highway? We need the space, and honestly, having you there would kind of ruin the aesthetic/vibe. I'll Venmo you for the room. Love you." I read it twice. Then a third time. Ruin the vibe. I looked up at the corner of the porch. Sure enough, a small white plastic camera was mounted there, staring down at me like a cyclops. I hadn't installed that. I hadn't installed the lock. Most fathers would have felt hurt. They would have felt that sharp pang of rejection, the sting of a child embarrassed by their parent. I didn't feel hurt. I felt a cold, mechanical shift in my chest. It was the feeling of a gearbox disengaging from family and sliding seamlessly into business. I looked through the living room window. The blinds were open. My leather Chesterfield sofa, the one I'd restored by hand, was gone. In its place were 3 beanbag chairs and a shade of beige that looked like wet oatmeal. My fly fishing rods, which usually rested above the mantel, had been taken down. In their spot hung a neon sign that read "Manifest Your Truth" in cursive pink light. And there were bottles. Champagne bottles. Vodka bottles. Dozens of them, cluttering the granite island I had paid to have installed last spring. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't bang on the door. The dad inside me wanted to scream, to demand respect. But the man who owned the deed knew better. You don't negotiate with terrorists, and you certainly don't negotiate with people who think they can evict you from your own life via text message. I picked up the cooler. I walked back to the truck. Inside the cab, I sat for a moment, watching the house. I could see movement now, shadows passing the windows. I saw Chloe. She was holding a ring light, adjusting her hair, laughing at something a blonde girl in a bikini was saying. She looked happy. She looked powerful. She looked like the queen of the castle. She had no idea the castle was built on a fault line, and she had no idea I was the one holding the tectonic plates. I started the truck. I didn't turn toward the highway and the Motel 6. I turned right, down the gravel service road that ran along the property line. I wasn't going to a hotel. I was going to war. But first, I needed coffee, and I needed to make a phone call to a man named Ray, who drove a truck that smelled like sulfur and consequences. To understand the severity of the insult, you have to understand the history of the money. Chloe is 24. She lists her occupation as lifestyle curator and digital nomad. In reality, her occupation is Arthur's daughter. I made my money in commercial logistics. It's not sexy work. It's early mornings, broken pallets, disputes with unions, and spreadsheets that make your eyes bleed. It is a world of hard contracts and tangible results. If you don't deliver the cargo, you don't get paid. There is no vibe. There is only done or not done. I raised Chloe alone after her mother passed. I compensated for the loss with excess. That was my sin. I wanted her to have the softness I never had. I paid for the private liberal arts college where she majored in communications with a minor in networking. I paid for the apartment in the city that cost more per month than my first 3 cars combined. I paid for the lease on the white Range Rover she drove up here. I created the monster that was currently drinking Veuve Clicquot on my dime. But the lake house was different. The lake house was the one thing I kept for myself. It was the only line item in my portfolio that wasn't accessible to her whims. It was my retreat. It was where I went to forget that I was a checkbook with a pulse. I sat in the booth of the local diner, the rusty spoon, nursing a black coffee. The waitress, Marge, knew me. She'd already poured my second cup without asking. "Not fishing today, Arthur?" she asked, wiping down the counter. "Not yet, Marge," I said, waiting on the weather to turn. I pulled out my phone. I opened Instagram. I didn't follow Chloe. We had a mutual agreement that my energy wasn't right for her comment section, but her profile was public. I tapped on her story. The video opened with a shaky pan of my living room. "Hey guys, literally so excited to welcome you to the Solstice Retreat." Chloe's voice was pitched an octave higher than normal. "We secured this exclusive estate for the weekend. It's totally private, totally luxe. We're going to be doing yoga, manifestation workshops, and just soaking in the abundance." She spun the camera around. "And tomorrow night is the big event, the Sunset Gala. We have sponsors coming. We have DJ K-Rad spinning. It's going to be insane. Link in bio for the exclusive stream." I paused the video. Exclusive estate. Secured. She spoke as if she had brokered a deal, as if she had put down a deposit, as if she had signed a contract. She had done none of those things. She had stolen a key from my spare drawer in the city, driven 4 hours, and hijacked my property because she knew I was a pushover. She was banking on the fact that I would do what I always did: sigh, write a check, and disappear to avoid a scene. She was banking on my love for her outweighing my self-respect. It was a calculated gamble. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter just the way I like it. I scrolled to the next slide. It was a photo of the guest list. I zoomed in. It wasn't just her friends. There were names of local business owners, a couple of minor celebrities, people with real money, people whose opinion mattered to Chloe more than oxygen. She had leveraged the house to buy status. She was selling access to a lifestyle she didn't own. This wasn't just a party. It was a product launch. She was launching herself, using my assets as the stage. If I went back there now and kicked them out, what would happen? She would cry. She would make a scene. She would tell her followers that her abusive father threw her out on the street. The narrative would shift. I would be the villain. She would get sympathy views. She would win. No, the best way to destroy a weed isn't to cut the leaves. It's to let it grow, let it think it has found the sun, and then pour gasoline on the roots. I needed her to commit. I needed her to be so deep in the lie that there was no way out. I needed the audience to be seated, the curtain to rise, and the spotlight to be on her face before I cut the cord. I looked at the time. 2 p.m. on Friday. The gala was Saturday at 6 p.m. That gave me 28 hours. 28 hours to let her dig the hole. 28 hours to let her spend money she didn't have on catering she couldn't pay for. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to R. Ray's Septic and Excavation. I hit dial. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Ray, it's Arthur. From the lake. Arthur, thought you were coming up this weekend. I saw the truck pass by. I am here, Ray. Listen, I have a situation. I need to book a service call. Toilet backed up? Not yet, I said, my voice low. But I have a feeling there's going to be a catastrophic system failure tomorrow evening. Around 6:15 p.m., right in the middle of dinner. There was a pause on the line. Ray has known me for 20 years. He knows I don't joke about infrastructure. What kind of failure are we talking about, Artie? The kind that requires the big truck, I said. The one with the backup beepers. And Ray? Don't empty the tank before you come. I want the full bouquet. Ray chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. I got you. Emergency pump out. 6:15. I'll bring the boys. Thanks, Ray. I hung up. I left a $20 bill on the table for Marge and walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled of pine and impending justice. I wasn't staying at the Motel 6. I drove to the hardware store. I needed a new padlock for the breaker box, a high-visibility vest, and a clipboard. If I was going to play the role of the maintenance man, I was going to dress the part. My daughter wanted a vibe. I was about to give her one she'd never forget. Saturday morning broke with the kind of sunshine realtors pray for. Crisp, golden, not a cloud in the sky to threaten the content. I spent the night in the cab of my truck, parked down a logging trail about a mile from the property line. I could have slept in a bed at the Motel 6, but that would have felt like surrender. Sleeping in the truck felt like a stakeout. It felt like work. At 7 a.m., I drove to the highest point on the public road overlooking the lake. From here, with a decent pair of binoculars, I had a clear line of sight to my back deck. It was an anthill of activity. A white van with Taste of the Valley catering stenciled on the side was backed up to my garage. I watched as two guys in black polos unloaded trays of what looked like shrimp, artisan cheeses, and enough alcohol to sedate a small army. Then came the florists. Massive, towering arrangements of pampas grass and white roses were being hauled onto my deck. They were placing them dangerously close to the propane grill. I did the mental math. Catering for 50 people. Minimum $3,500. Floral arrangements. Easily $1,500. The DJ, who I could see setting up a massive sound system near my boat dock. Another $1,000. Chloe was spending close to $6,000 on a party at a house she didn't own. With money she almost certainly borrowed from a credit card I was a co-signer on. I pulled out my phone and checked her Instagram again. She was live. Good morning, lovelies. It is literally the big day. The Sunset Gala is happening tonight at the estate. I've been up since 5 a.m., just like curating the energy for this space. It's so important to me that my home reflects my soul, you know? My home. She stood in front of the camera, wearing a silk robe, holding a green juice. Behind her, I saw one of the florists dragging a heavy ceramic pot across my teak decking. I winced. I knew that sound. That was the sound of varnish being gouged. A lot of you have been asking about the design, she continued, walking through the sliding glass doors into the living room. I went for a very minimalist, rustic chic vibe. I actually had to clear out a lot of the old, heavy furniture that was here before. It just had such heavy, stagnant energy. We wanted flow. Stagnant energy. That stagnant energy was a hand-tufted leather sofa I bought to celebrate paying off the mortgage. That stagnant energy was the result of 3 decades of 60-hour weeks. She walked past the fireplace. My stomach tightened. The natural river stone I had hand-selected from the quarry 10 years ago, was white. They hadn't just painted it. They had whitewashed it. It looked like a cheap flip house in the suburbs. We brightened up the stone to give it that airy, Hamptons feel, she chirped. I lowered the phone. My hand was shaking. Not from fear. From a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. Paint on stone is porous. That wasn't a vibe. That was permanent damage. To fix that, I'd have to sandblast the entire hearth inside the house. The line had been crossed. Yesterday, it was disrespect. Today, it was property destruction. I put the truck in gear. I didn't drive to the house. Not yet. I drove to the hardware store again. I needed one more item. A heavy-duty padlock. If they liked secure, I was going to give them secure. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the public library, printing out documents. I printed a copy of the deed. I printed a copy of the most recent property tax receipt. And I drafted a simple, 1-page invoice. Item: unauthorized renovation, stone masonry restoration. Cost: $12,000. I sat in the library parking lot and waited. The sun began to dip lower. The light turned that rich, honey amber color that photographers love. 5:45 p.m. I texted Ray. Green light. Initiation in 30 minutes. Ray replied with a thumbs-up emoji. I drove back to the logging trail. I parked the truck. I put on the high-visibility yellow vest. I clipped my ID badge from the logistics plant onto my chest pocket. I grabbed the clipboard. I wasn't Arthur the dad anymore. I was Arthur the asset manager. I walked through the woods, approaching the property from the rear. I could hear the bass thumping from a quarter-mile away. The music was loud. Not just loud, it was a physical force. The bass from the DJ's speakers rattled the pine needles on the forest floor. I stayed in the tree line, watching. The gala was in full swing. There were about 60 people on my deck. The women were in long, flowing dresses. The men were in linen suits and loafers without socks. They were holding my crystal glasses, drinking the wine I had been saving for my retirement. The lighting was perfect. String lights crisscrossed the deck, casting a warm, magical glow over the scene. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing the content. In the center of it all was Chloe. She looked radiant. She was holding a microphone, standing on a small platform they had erected over my herb garden. "I just want to thank you all for coming to my sanctuary." Her voice boomed over the speakers. "This place represents everything I've built. It's my legacy." I checked my watch. 6:14 p.m. I moved. I walked silently to the north side of the house, where the utility shed stood. It was separate from the main cabin, hidden by a trellis of ivy. This shed housed the main breaker panel for the entire property and the pump controls for the septic system. I unlocked the shed door. It swung open on well-oiled hinges. Inside, the hum of the electricity was steady. The breakers were all flipped to on. I looked through the crack in the door. I could see the driveway. A massive, rusted, white tanker truck was idling at the bottom of the hill. Ray. He was right on time. I watched Ray back the truck up. He didn't do it quietly. He engaged the reverse gear, and the piercing beep-beep-beep cut through the ambient house music like a knife. Heads turned on the deck. The drone hovered, confused. "What is that?" someone shouted over the music. Ray didn't stop. He backed the truck right up to the edge of the patio, the massive tank blocking the view of the lake. The truck rumbled, a diesel beast invading the aesthetic. Chloe looked panicked. She waved at the DJ to turn the music down, but he couldn't hear her. That was my cue. I reached for the main breaker handle, the big red one at the top of the panel labeled Main Disconnect. I gripped it with both hands. "This is for the fireplace," I whispered. Clunk! The sound of the breaker tripping was heavy and final. Instantly, the music died. The string lights went black. The kitchen lights inside went dark. The drone's navigation lights blinked rapidly as it lost its connection to the controller. The sudden silence was deafening. For 3 seconds, there was no sound except the idle of Ray's diesel truck and the confused murmurs of 60 influencers standing in the dark. Then came the smell. Ray hopped out of the truck. He was wearing coveralls that had seen things no man should see. He unhooked the massive, corrugated suction hose from the side of the tank. He didn't attach it to the septic port. He just laid the open end of the hose, the end that had been inside 1,000 septic tanks, on the edge of the patio, upwind of the catering table. The smell hit the crowd like a physical wall. It was a thick, sulfurous wave of raw sewage and decay. Gags, coughs, screams. "Oh my God, what is that?" A girl in a white dress shrieked, covering her nose with a silk napkin. "It smells like, oh God, I'm going to be sick," a man in a linen suit gagged. That was my entrance. I clicked my flashlight on. I walked out of the shadows of the utility shed, the beam cutting through the twilight. I marched up the steps of the deck, my boots heavy on the wood. I didn't look at the guests. I looked at the clipboard. "Attention!" I barked. My voice was projected, authoritative. The voice of a foreman clearing a dangerous job site. The crowd parted. Chloe stood there, frozen, a champagne glass dangling from her hand. She squinted at the flashlight beam. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I ignored her. I turned to the crowd, shining the light on my high-vis vest. "I am the property manager," I announced. "We have a catastrophic septic failure and a code-red electrical hazard. The leach field is compromising the foundation. This entire structure is condemned effective immediately." Ray, bless his heart, chose that moment to rev the vacuum pump on his truck. It sounded like a jet engine sucking sludge. The smell intensified. "You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before the county health inspector arrives to quarantine the zone," I shouted over the noise. "Move your vehicles now, or they will be towed to clear access for the hazmat team." Panic. It wasn't a polite exit. It was a stampede. Influencers grabbed their purses and ran. The DJ frantically started unplugging his gear in the dark. The caterers were throwing trays of shrimp into the back of their van, gagging from the smell. Chloe stood alone in the center of the chaos. The legacy, the sanctuary, it was all dissolving into a cloud of diesel fumes and sewage stench. She looked at me. Her face wasn't angry anymore. It was pale. She looked at the guests fleeing. She looked at the dark house. She looked at the property manager who held the deed. "Dad, you can't," she started. I shined a flashlight directly into her eyes, blinding her for a second. "The owner wants a word with the tenant," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "Inside. Now." I turned and walked toward the dark, open door of my house. I didn't wait to see if she followed. I knew she would. She had nowhere else to go. The trap had snapped shut. Now it was time to skin the catch. The heavy oak door clicked shut, cutting off the chaos outside. The silence inside the cabin was sudden and absolute, save for the hum of the refrigerator that was now slowly warming up in the dark. Chloe stood in the entryway, her silhouette framed by the faint moonlight coming through the transom window. She was trembling, not from the cold, it was 70 degrees, but from the adrenaline crash of social humiliation. I didn't speak. I clicked my flashlight to the high beam setting. The circle of light hit her chest, then moved up to her face. Her makeup was running. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint gone wrong. "How could you?" she hissed. Her voice was thin, Reedy. "Do you have any idea how much this cost me? My sponsors, the brand deals. I'm going to be a laughingstock." She was still talking about her brand. She was still talking about her reputation. She hadn't even noticed the smell of sulfur that had drifted in with us. I moved the beam of light away from her face. I swept it across the room. It illuminated the beanbag chairs. The Manifest Your Truth neon sign, now dead and gray. And then the beam landed on the fireplace. The white paint looked even worse in the harsh LED light. It looked like a scar. "Do you know what this stone is?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. "What?" She wiped her nose. "It's just rock, Dad. We updated it." It was dark and depressing. "It's river blue granite," I said, "quarried 40 miles north of here. It took a mason 3 weeks to lay this hearth. It breathes. It holds heat. It lasts." I walked over to the fireplace and ran my finger over the painted surface. It came away chalky white. "You suffocated it with latex paint because it didn't match your ring light," I said. "This is an update, Chloe. This is vandalism." "Stop being dramatic," she screamed, stomping her foot. "I can fix it. I'll paint it back." "You can't paint it back," I said. "Stone is porous. To fix this, I have to hire a sandblaster. I have to strip the entire surface down to the raw grain. It's going to make a mess you can't even imagine." I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out the folded invoice I had drafted in the library. I walked over to her and held it out. "What is this?" she asked, taking it. "That," I said, shining the light on the paper, "is the bill." She squinted at it in the dark. "Masonry restoration, $12,000. Environmental cleanup, $1,500. Locksmith services, $400. Total, $13,900. She looked up at me, her mouth open. "You're joking." "I don't joke about accounts receivable," I said. "You wanted to be the boss? You wanted to host the event? Then you pay the venue fees. You have 30 days to wire the funds. If you don't, I will deduct it from the trust fund your mother left you. And since that fund is discretionary until you turn 25, I have full control over the disbursement." "You can't do that," she shrieked. "That's my money. It's my money," I corrected her. "It was always my money. You were just the authorized user. And as of tonight, your card is declined." I walked past her to the front door. I opened it. The smell of the septic tank was still strong, but the truck was gone. Ray had done his job and vanished like a ghost. The guests were gone. The driveway was empty except for her white Range Rover. "Get out," I said. "Dad." Her voice cracked. The anger was gone, replaced by fear. She realized for the first time that the safety net was gone. "Go to the Motel 6, I said. "I hear they have vacancies." "And Chloe? Don't come back until that invoice is paid in full. I'm changing the locks again in the morning." She stared at me for a long moment. She looked small. She looked like a child again, waiting for me to fix it. But I didn't move. I didn't offer a hug. I stood in the doorway, a shadow with a flashlight, guarding the gate. She turned and ran to her car. I watched her taillights fade down the gravel road. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I was alone in the dark. And for the first time all weekend, the house felt like mine again. The next morning, I woke up with the sun. The house was quiet. The smell of the septic disaster had dissipated thanks to the mountain breeze, Ray hadn't actually emptied the tank on the lawn. He just opened the valve enough to let the gas escape. It was a theatrical trick, a harmless illusion. The white paint on the fireplace, however, was very real. I made a pot of coffee on the camping stove I kept in the garage since the power was still off at the main breaker. I sat on the deck, watching the mist rise off the lake. My phone had blown up overnight. Text messages from Chloe. A few missed calls from my sister, asking why Chloe was crying in a motel room. I didn't answer them. Instead, I called the mason. He said he could be out on Tuesday to start the sandblasting. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. I dragged the beanbag chairs to the curb. I took down a neon sign and put it in the trash. I brought my leather sofa back in from the garage, wiping away the dust with saddle soap until the leather gleamed like mahogany. By noon, the solstice retreat was erased. The sanctuary was gone. The lake house was back. I walked down to the breaker shed. I flipped the switch. The hum of the refrigerator returned. The lights flickered on. The house woke up. I sat in my leather chair, facing the ruined fireplace. It was going to be a lot of work to fix it. Dust, noise, expense. But looking at it, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt vindicated. The paint was a reminder. It was a reminder that you cannot coat reality with a vibe. You cannot paint over the truth and expect it to stick. Eventually, the stone rejects the paint. Eventually, the owner comes home. Chloe would learn. Or she wouldn't. That was up to her now. But she would never mistake my silence for permission again. And as for the money, she paid it. Or rather, the trust fund paid it. I transferred the $13,900 the next day. I used it to pay the mason, and I used the leftover to buy a new, top-of-the-line fishing boat. I named the boat the Landlord. The lesson: in a world obsessed with optics, it is easy to mistake the person making the noise for the person holding the power. We live in an era of tenants, people who borrow, rent, and lease their status, hoping no one checks the deed. But real power doesn't need a ring light. Real power doesn't need to post about its legacy. Real power is the name on the title. It is the ability to change the locks. It is the patience to wait in the dark while the tenant throws a party, knowing that at any moment you can pull the plug. Never underestimate the quiet man with the keys. He isn't arguing with you because he doesn't have to. He's just waiting for you to finish your drink so he can turn out the lights. This is Dante, signing off.